So we kind of have to talk about Beauty and the Beast, right? So let's talk about that. Now, it's actually kind of funny. I feel like I did a video about this. I've done a couple of videos about this movie. I did one video predicting the highest grossing films of the year, and this was a couple months back before all the hustle and bustle. I know they've been selling this film really hard, but it was before all the pre-release sales that were been going on, all the records being broke, all this other stuff. The real hype started building up in these last 3 months for this film, and now we're looking at like one of the biggest openings of the year, obviously the biggest opening of the year, if not one of the biggest openings of all time. So just to really kind of unpack just how well this movie's probably going to do this weekend, and hopefully I'm going to get this movie or this video out to you guys before we get any real numbers. So just speculating on that, we'll be getting numbers really soon tomorrow morning. Might make another update video about that. Just want to kind of get this out there. We don't really know exactly how well it's going to do, but there is really wide speculation at this point. But just to kind of break it down, in terms of anticipation for Beauty and the Beast, for what it is currently the fastest selling family film in Fandango history, outpacing Finding Dory, which went on to open to about 135 million last year. I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was last year. It's also kind of outpacing at the same point of Captain America Civil War, and also at the same point it's obviously outpacing Avengers Age of Ultron. Respectively, those opened up to 179 million and 191 million respectively. And obviously at the same point it's also kind of beating Batman vs. Superman, which it opened up to about 166 million back in March of last year. Why that's important is because Batman vs. Superman is currently the highest grossing weekend in March history, and a lot of people are really expecting Beauty and the Beast to basically wipe the floor with it this weekend, which would kind of be a breaking of a record in its own right. But a lot of people are also suggesting that it could probably beat Captain America Civil War as 179.1 million, considering if it does that, it would kind of creep its way into one of the top 5 openings of all time. Now, that's really kind of a bullish expectation for this, but I guess there are some reasons to actually think that might actually happen this weekend. It's kind of a long-standing tradition, belief, and everything that you get women excited to go see a film. And not to say that this movie doesn't have cross appeal, it does. But at the same time, the numbers seem to suggest that women are going to be the driving force for this film. And that's not a bad thing. I feel like this is something that's kind of this is kind of at the height of 90s nostalgia at this point. And for the most part, I feel like women have kind of been forgotten about in this type of 90s nostalgia renaissance that we've been having. We have other films opening this month like Power Rangers, or I guess Ghost in the Shell. You had another Logan movie that was just all nostalgia, basically for Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, more so than just the character himself, because he's obviously been in the limelight for a really long time. And also you have all the other movies that are basically coming out throughout the last couple years and everything. And Disney's kind of been at the forefront of giving people what they want, especially young women or maybe millennials who are now growing up and having daughters and children of their own who want to share with what they actually experienced as kids, like the 90s Beauty and the Beast movie. And you don't necessarily get a lot of them outside of Disney's kind of reimaginings of their old animated classics. And, hats off to Disney. I feel like they've actually done a really good job marketing this movie. Obviously, there is a huge fan base for the Beauty and the Beast movies. I don't know who remembers this, but it was really kind of a big deal a couple of years ago. I think it was like 2011. They actually re-released Lion King in 2011, 3D. I think it was 3D, and they were able to gross like a lot of money. I can't really remember off the top of my head, but I was doing some research before I actually started recording this, and if you remember, they actually released Beauty and the Beast as well in the 3D format and went on to make $47.6 million. Those two movies made a lot of money, and considering the fact that they also did the kind of the same thing, releasing Beauty and the Beast in IMAX in 2001 to make $25.4 million, also considering that the fact that these movies have basically been in circulation on the home market and even on television and all this stuff syndicated everywhere for the last couple decades at that point, it's really impressive that they were actually do that much. So there definitely is a huge fan base for these films, and we gotta kind of respect just how much of a fan base, a rabid fan base as it seems, I guess. For me, maybe it's not necessarily directed towards me, and I don't feel like that's really a bad thing, but I guess this is kind of why I just wasn't necessarily looking at it in the right angle. But honestly, this is really interesting information. It's one of the coolest stuff that's happening this year at the box office, and it's going to be a very, very exciting weekend. So I might do more than one video about it. I've already done a couple of videos about this particular property, and considering that we have our first huge blockbuster, maybe even one of the biggest openers of all time, it's going to be really interesting to see exactly where this kind of ends up. And considering the fact that 2017 has kind of been lagging week to week, where 2016's actually been for the last couple months, it's kind of behind. I feel like it's behind less than 1% at this point, if I remember that right, which is only a couple $1 million at this point, because March has been a pretty good month for the most part. Logan beat expectation, Kong beat expectation, and it really seems like Beauty and the Beast is going to blow everything out of the water, so much so that it's going to be really interesting to see where Power Rangers and Ghost in the Shell actually end up, and Boss Baby and all the other stuff that's opening this month. But we're just going to really have to wait and see on that. So we've had a really interesting year, and I think one of the things that we have to think about when we're looking at Beauty and the Beast when it comes to opening this time in March is that I feel like the market, for what it's worth, not that it's not a cross-gender, cross-generational type of film, it definitely is a four corners type of film, but at the same time, like I said in the beginning of this video, it's kind of pulling more towards women at this point, and we have to kind of look at it in a way to suggest that maybe it's like the best time it could actually open, because like I said, you've had stuff like Logan and Kong and Get Out and Split all open really well, hold on very well this year. Those are probably the main hitters of this year, outside of maybe Batman versus or Lego Batman, and then John Wick, which is another kind of male-oriented high-end, like high octane type of film. So maybe there's a market that's kind of been clamoring for something like this, and it's just building up to a perfect storm of just the right property, the right marketing, and just the right exact time with all this other stuff doing really well in the theaters that people want to go out and see this film. So it's going to be a very big weekend. So just to kind of give you my predictions, if you didn't know all that, it's pretty interesting. I'll leave some links in the description section below for anyone who wants to go and do their own predictions, see the other news that's being leaked, or not leaked, but actually just put out there, other predictions and all that. Places I go to all the time: Box Office Mojo, boxoffice.com, thenumbers.com, Box Office Guru. I think not as much anymore, but anyway. So I'm thinking, a lot of people are thinking anywhere between, I guess, 150 million to 180 million plus, and that's a pretty big range. I feel like personally, we're going to see something that's kind of a little bit in between. I do believe that Beauty and the Beast has a very good chance at beating Batman vs. Superman's 166 million March record, but at the same time, getting to something like Captain America's Civil War record is going to be a little bit difficult, and I'm not necessarily sure it can do that. For my money, I would say 170 million is probably the safest bet that we can assume. But at the same time, a lot of people are kind of speculating. A lot of people think, and I believe it's kind of okay to think, given everything I've just said, that maybe we're looking at something kind of a cultural phenomenon type of film that's going to basically blow everything out of the water. And maybe 180 million plus weekend, maybe even kind of rivaling Avengers Age of Ultron's 191 million. We're going to have to wait and see. But at the same time, I hope everyone liked this video. I hope everyone kind of has their own speculation. Honestly, I'm not necessarily sure where this film is going to end up, but we're just gonna have to wait and see. Like I said, I'll be covering it over the weekend. Like I said, maybe 170 million is probably the safest bet, but it's going to be really interesting to see where this film ends up. Honestly, at this point, Disney is basically expecting 120 million plus. That's their industry standard. But just to give it kind of a little bit of a context, studios always underestimate. They don't ever want to seem like a film is going to tank if they think it's going to open up. If they really want it to open 180 million plus, they're not going to say it's going to do that, because there's a chance that it won't. And if they do that, if they expect that and they pull those numbers, and they then they predict those numbers and then they don't pull those numbers, it does kind of bad for them bottom line. Stocks plummet and all this other stuff because the industry was expecting one thing and they didn't necessarily get it. So they're very, very conservative on that. But just a last note about this film, why it's really exciting. If you go and look at all the other Disney movies that have kind of followed this same trend about exactly how much a movie is going to make, or how much movies actually make domestically versus internationally, just kind of talking on that, because I'm not necessarily seeing a lot of people talk about that. But one of the things, like one of the trends that we see for these retellings of fairy tales a lot, is the fact that essentially the domestic market usually ends up making about a third of the overall box office grosses, which isn't uncommon for these type of big films. But the cool thing is a lot of them do very well. So you have films making 200 million going on to make about, at the same time, that's only about a third of their gross. So then you make like 700 million worldwide, or maybe if they make 300 million, they make 600 million to make $1 billion or something like that. It kind of varies depending on which other film. But if this film can open up to about 170 million, it would have a really good shot at making about 400 million, considering the fact that that would probably be about a third of its gross. Then we have Beauty and the Beast, a very early film in the year, basically vying for one of the top grossing films of the year, probably not considering the amazing films that we're getting throughout the year, but $1.2 billion overall is probably a very good estimate if it does open as big as everyone is expecting. So that's just my initial stuff before we actually see any numbers come in. But like I said, please make sure to tell me what your thoughts about this in the comment section below. Are you excited for this film? Tell me your thoughts on the film. Anyway, I'll catch you on the next real numbers video. Bye.